Case 1. Samantha Bevans. She recorded herself afterward. 2 days after her stepmother stopped breathing in her own home, she stood in front of the phone camera, jumping up and down, and told the world she had done it herself. Detectives in this case never had to dig for a confession. Theirs was already filmed, already posted, already sitting on a screen waiting for somebody to press play. Jodie Bevans was 58 years old and a nurse. She had married Mike Bevans and spent 18 years as part of that family in the small town of Palo, Iowa, out in Benton County. She was the kind of woman who spent her working life looking after other people, and by every account from the family she left behind, she carried that same instinct home with her. She had children of her own. She also had a stepdaughter, and that stepdaughter had become a problem. Samantha Bevans was 35. She had moved back into the family home, and the arrangement had not gone well. There was drug use. There was tension. And about a month before the killing, Mike and Jodie made the decision that a lot of parents eventually have to make with an adult child who will not straighten out. They told Samantha she had to go. That was the first grievance. The second one came shortly after. Samantha had a court hearing over a custody issue involving her children, and she wanted Jodie there. Jodie did not turn up. So, in the space of a few weeks, the woman who had been in Samantha's life for the better part of 2 decades had put her out of the house and refused to back her in court. Prosecutors would later describe what came next in 4 words that fit the whole case: payback and pay out. Revenge on one side, and on the other, a home safe that Samantha wanted opened. She did not act alone. Her boyfriend, a man named Takoa Talley, was in it with her. And somewhere in the run-up, Samantha wrote herself a list of things to do. Ordinary handwriting, ordinary paper. One of the items on it was to kill Jodie. On the 14th of July 2022, they did exactly that. Jodie Bevans was suffocated with a pillow inside her own home. There was no weapon fired, nothing quick about it. An assistant attorney general for the state of Iowa, a man named Monty Platts, put it in front of the jury in plain language. It was a slow way to kill somebody, an up-close, personal way. That is a detail worth sitting with, because it takes time to smother a person, and every second of that time is a second where you could stop. There was a second reason to be in that house, and it had nothing to do with grievance. Prosecutors told the jury about a safe. The revenge and the robbery were not competing motives. They were the same errand, which is what makes the phrase the state used so exact. She went there to settle a score and to take what she could carry out afterward. Jodie's body was found the following day, the 15th of July, and then, on the morning of the 16th, at 14 minutes past 9, Samantha Bevans posted a video to Snapchat. In it, she is celebrating. She is jumping around, and she says she killed her, and then she says it again with the word herself on the end, in case anybody watching had missed the point. Tally is in the background telling her he knew this was going to happen, and telling her good job. She had murdered the woman who raised her husband's household for 18 years, and then she had made content out of it. The case went to a jury in Benton County in May of 2024. Her defense argued diminished responsibility, that she was not in a state to have formed a plan. The state brought in experts who testified that she was entirely capable of premeditation, and the jury agreed with them. Samantha Bevans was convicted of first-degree murder, which in Iowa carries 1 sentence and only one: life in prison with no possibility of parole. Takoa Talley had already been convicted of first-degree murder the year before and given the same life term. Samantha was also ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution. She appealed. On the 17th of September 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals affirmed the conviction. The verdict stands. What lingers about this one is not the plan, because the plan was crude. It is the celebration. Jodie Bevans had 2 decades in that family, a nursing career, children who loved her. Her son and her daughters sat in a courtroom and read out what her death had done to them. One of her daughters looked at Samantha and told her she would only ever be remembered as proof that God makes mistakes. A woman died in her own house because she asked her stepdaughter to leave and would not back her in court. Then the person who did it filmed a victory dance. Think about what those 18 years actually were. Jodie Bevans married into that family and stayed. She kept working as a nurse. She was there for the ordinary years, the ones nobody makes a documentary about. And when the adult stepdaughter in her home would not get clean, she did the unglamorous thing and held a line. Holding that line is the entire reason she is dead. Mike Bevans lost his wife and, in the same week, learned that his own daughter had killed her. There is no version of that arithmetic that leaves a family standing. Samantha Bevans lost her home and answered it with a pillow. The young man in our next case was given almost the same news, that it was time to find somewhere else to live, and he answered it with a pickaxe. Case 2. Oscar Luis Morlet III. He told a neighbour he hated her. He said out loud that he wished she was dead. The following day, he tried to poison her drinking water, and when that did not work, he waited until the house was empty and went into her bedroom carrying a garden tool. Then he called 911 and blamed the gardeners. Jan Ellen Morlet was 66 years old. She lived in Lake Forest, California, in the Foothill Ranch neighborhood, in a home on a street called Blazewood, with her husband Oscar Morlet Sr. and his son Alex. In the summer of 2013, another son moved in with them. Oscar Luis Morlet III was 21. His own mother, Lisa Powell, had thrown him out of her house that June. So his father and his stepmother took him in. He had no job. He got around on a bicycle. He had a small history with the courts already, misdemeanor weapons matters, nothing that suggested what was coming. The trouble started with a conversation about the future. Jen and his father were planning to downsize and move to a smaller place. That meant the arrangement could not continue, and they suggested Oscar find somewhere of his own, specifically that he look at a rescue mission. The senior deputy district attorney who later tried the case, a man named Seaton Hunt, summed up how the defendant took that news. He felt the victim was pushing him out of the house. That is the whole motive. A woman who had opened her home to a grown stepson told him it was time to move on, and he decided she had to die for it. He did not hide how he felt. On the 6th of August 2013, he told a neighbour that he hated his stepmother, and he said he wished she was dead. He had also convinced himself she was some kind of spy. The next day, the 7th, he went further than talk. He poured scented oil into her drinking water, hoping it would make her sick. It did not. On the morning of the 9th of August, his father and his brother both left for work. That left Oscar alone in the house with Jeanne. At about 11:15, a neighbour heard 3 screams, or moans, something human and something wrong, 3 times over. He attacked her in her bed with a pickaxe. She was struck 17 times. There is no gentler way to describe a weapon like that in a bedroom, and there is no version of this where it happened quickly or by accident. At 18 minutes past 11, he picked up the phone and called for help. And he told the operator his mother had been attacked in a home invasion and that he had managed to run out the back door. The call cut off. When a dispatcher tried to ring back, it went to voicemail. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Department reached the house and found Jean's body. Oscar was picked up about 2 miles away. He had gone to Saddleback Church, where he called 911 a second time and repeated the story about gardeners attacking her. The state of him when deputies reached him was the end of that story. Later, he told investigators the truth, that he had gone into her room with the pickaxe while she was in bed. Then this case did something unusual. It took almost a decade to finish. He was found unfit to assist his own defense and was committed to Patton State Hospital for 15 months until his competency was restored. An earlier attempt to try him ended in a mistrial, meaning a jury had already sat through the evidence once, and the whole process had to begin again from nothing. For the Morlett family, that meant living through the worst days of their lives twice over, waiting years for a verdict that kept receding. When the case finally reached an Orange County jury, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, which in California splits a trial into two halves. First, the jury decides whether he did it. Then a second phase decides whether he was sane when he did. On the 2nd of March 2023, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder and found true the allegation that he had personally used a deadly weapon. 13 days later, on the 15th of March, the same jurors came back and found that Oscar Luis Morlett III had been sane at the time he killed his stepmother. That finding closed the door on a hospital commitment and opened the one to a prison cell. On the 3rd of April 2023, he was sentenced to 26 years to life. He appealed, arguing his confession should never have been allowed in front of the jury. The appellate court disagreed and found that he had given it voluntarily. Nearly 10 years passed between the morning a neighbour heard those 3 screams and the afternoon a judge finally handed down a sentence. Jean Morlett had taken in a young man who had nowhere else to go, fed him, housed him, and asked for nothing except that he eventually stand on his own. Telling him so cost her her life. What makes this one sit badly is how much warning there was. He announced it to a neighbour 3 days ahead. He attempted a poisoning the day before. Any one of those moments, heard by the right person and taken seriously, might have been the thing that saved her. Instead, the words got filed away as a young man venting, which is what almost everybody would have assumed, and the only person in the house with him that morning was the woman he had already told a stranger he wanted dead. Oscar Morlett swung the weapon himself. The woman in our next case never touched her stepmother. She found somebody who would, and she told him exactly what the job was worth. Subscribing is how stories like this one keep showing up in your feed. It is free, and it takes a second. Case 3. Tosha Daly. The men who turned up that morning were only there to repossess a car. They were standing in the driveway doing paperwork when they heard a struggle coming from inside the house. What they had stumbled into was a contract killing, arranged and paid for by the family member who had driven the killer to that door and handed him the knife herself. Jamie Ruth Daly was 46 years old. She lived in Green Township near Chambersburg in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, on a quiet residential street. She was the stepmother of a woman from Greencastle named Tosha May Daly, who was in her late 20s, and there was no warmth left in that relationship at all. 2 things sat underneath it. The first was ordinary family friction, the kind that curdles over years, and a running dispute over a car that had been repossessed. The second was the thing that turned resentment into a plan. Tosha found out that Jamie had a life insurance policy. That is all it took. Tosha did not intend to do the killing herself. She went looking for somebody who would, and she found a young man in his early 20s named Nicholas Von Allen Shin. She told him what she wanted, and she named a figure: $30,000. Whether that money ever existed, or whether she had any way of getting hold of it, is not clear from anything in the record. What matters is that Shin believed her. Later, when state troopers had him in an interview room, he explained his own role in a single sentence that could not be misread. He said he was going to get paid to whack her stepmum. In early December of 2017, Tosha drove Nicholas Shin to Jamie Daly's home. She gave him a knife. Then she waited while he broke into the house. What happened inside was not quick, and it was not quiet. Jamie was stabbed repeatedly and beaten with a blunt object. She fought. That fight is the reason anybody knows what happened, because outside in the driveway was a repossession crew who had come for a vehicle, and they heard the struggle through the walls and called the police. Officers arrived that morning and found Jamie Daly outside, near a neighbouring home. She had got out of the house. She had not got any further than that. The case did not take long to break, because the two of them made no serious effort to disappear. The tow truck driver had seen the car they arrived in and gave police a description of it. That description led investigators to Nicholas Shin and Tosha Daly the same day. Then the two stories fell apart against each other. Shin told troopers the plain version, that this was a paid job, that Tosha had promised him $30,000, that she did not like her stepmother and had found out about the life insurance. Tosha told a different story. She insisted it had been a robbery that went wrong, that nobody was ever supposed to die. Faced with two accounts, investigators had the physical evidence, the timing, the knife, and the fact that she had personally driven the killer to the address. The robbery story had a problem, and the problem was the shape of the whole day. People who intend to steal from an empty house do not bring a passenger and wait outside while he goes in armed. They do not choose a weekday morning when someone is likely to be home, and they do not, in the weeks beforehand, go around discussing what a relative's life insurance policy is worth. Every piece of what Tosha Daly did before the 7th of December pointed at a person, not at property. There is also the matter of what she was willing to spend. $30,000 is the number Shin gave police, and whether or not she could ever have produced it, that was the figure she attached to her stepmother's life. Nicholas Shin pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. In October of 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison. Tosha Daly pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and robbery. On the 21st of January 2020, she was sentenced to 30 to 60 years behind bars, ordered to pay $10,000 in restitution, and barred from any contact with Jamie Daly's family. 30 to 60 years is a long time for a woman who was 26 when she was sentenced. If she serves the minimum, she will be in her mid-50s before she is even eligible to leave. If she serves the maximum, she will be an old woman if she comes out at all. There is a particular coldness to the hired killing that separates it from the others on this list. Samantha Bevans put her hands on a pillow. Oscar Morlett picked up a weapon. Tosha Daly did neither. She made a phone call, quoted a price, drove the car, passed over the knife, and then stood back and let somebody else do the part she did not want to do herself. She never had to watch. And the whole thing came apart because two men who had come to tow away a vehicle happened to be standing in the driveway at the wrong moment for her and the right moment for justice. Tosha Daly paid for a killing she did not want to witness. The man who comes next did all of his own work. And then he did it a second time when a neighbour started asking the wrong questions. Case 4. Ryan Michael Maguire. He killed her, and then he stayed. He kept the body in a chest in her house, drove her car around Baltimore County, and sold her belongings piece by piece to pay for drugs. For over a month, nobody knew she was dead, and when one woman across the street would not stop asking where her friend had gone, he killed her too. Judy Elizabeth Slebzak was 66 years old. She lived on Roseland Avenue in Rosedale in Baltimore County, Maryland. She had a stepson named Ryan Michael Maguire, 32 years old, who was on probation for burglary and needed somewhere to live. She let him move in. By the time he did, Maguire was deep into narcotics. Investigators would later say his motivation came down to the house and the money and whatever he could turn into a fix. And according to the charging documents in the case, this was not a moment of panic or a fight that got out of hand. He told police he had been planning it for several months. Around the 20th of May 2018, Ryan Maguire killed his stepmother inside her own home using an edged weapon. Then came the part that separates this case from almost every other one on this list. He did not run. He did not call anyone. He put Judy Slebzak's body inside a cedar chest in the house, closed the lid, and carried on living his life around it. He took her car. He gathered up her belongings and sold them off. Every day that passed was another day her friends and neighbours assumed she was simply away somewhere. Consider what that period actually required of him. Every morning he woke up in a house with a dead woman in it. He walked past that chest to get to the kitchen. He answered the door if somebody knocked. He worked out which of her possessions would fetch enough to be worth selling, took them out, sold them, came back, and did it again the next day. Judy Slebzak had given him a place to stay when a probation officer needed him to have an address, and he turned her home into a supply of things to trade. One of those neighbours was a woman named Cindy Bedina Testament. She was 61 years old, and she lived across the street, and she and Judy were friends. Cindy noticed that Judy had gone quiet. She started asking questions. She kept asking them. That is the entire extent of what Cindy Testament did wrong. She was not investigating anything. She had no suspicion of a murder. She was a woman in her 60s who had not seen her friend across the road in several weeks and wanted to know that she was all right. On the 23rd of June 2018, Ryan Maguire went across the road and killed her. When her relatives could not reach her, police were called. Officers found Cindy Testament on her own kitchen floor. The Maryland chief medical examiner ruled her death a homicide, caused by trauma inflicted with an edged weapon. She died one day before her 62nd birthday. What finally caught him was a camera. Cindy Testament had surveillance at her home, and the footage from it put Ryan Maguire at her door. Her 2013 Honda Accord was missing, and detectives tracked that vehicle to a motel in Baltimore. They found Maguire there, and they found him in possession of items belonging to both women. Both women. That detail closed the case on its own. He was carrying the property of two separate dead neighbours from the same street, one of whom had not yet been reported as a homicide victim because nobody knew she was a homicide victim. The second killing is what exposed the first, which means Judy Slebzak might have stayed missing for a great deal longer if Cindy Testament had simply minded her own business. In November of 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. On the 12th of December 2019, in Baltimore County Circuit Court, Ryan Michael Maguire was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The office of Baltimore County State's Attorney Scott Schellenberger handled the prosecution. Consecutive is the word that matters there. He does not begin serving the second life sentence until the first one is finished, which is a legal way of saying he will die in prison. The case later appeared on television as an episode about 2 neighbours, built around the surveillance footage that ended it. Step back and look at what those 34 days actually contained. A woman who gave her stepson a roof when he was on probation and had nowhere to go was murdered for the contents of her house. Her body sat in a chest while the man who put her there sold her possessions and drove her car. And then a friend of hers, a woman whose only involvement in any of this was that she cared enough to keep asking where Judy was killed for asking. Cindy Testament is the detail that stays with people. She was not family. She was not part of any dispute. She simply noticed that a neighbour had disappeared and refused to let it go. And that decency is what got her killed. Her son found her. 2 families lost somebody, and both of them lost her over the same handful of stolen belongings. Ryan Maguire killed for whatever he could carry out of a dead woman's home. The teenager in our last case for now made almost exactly the same bargain, except he was only 17 years old, and the price he offered was everything inside his family's house. A quick word before we go on. Hitting subscribe costs you nothing, and it keeps these investigations coming. Case 5. Charles Tsarenka Jr. He was 17. He did not want to do it himself, and he did not have any money to pay anybody, so he offered the only thing he had access to. He told a friend that if he got rid of his family, he could take whatever he wanted from the house. What followed inside that home lasted more than 5 hours. Marianne Marchi Jurenka was 55 years old. She lived in Windsor, Connecticut, with her husband, Charles Jurenka Sr., and his son, a 17-year-old known to everyone as CJ. Marianne's mother, Sandra Marchi, was 78, and she was in the house too. By every account the family gave afterward, Marianne had done the work of a parent for that boy. Their family lawyer, Jacqueline Reardon, laid it out plainly on their behalf. Marianne took care of him. She drove him to his appointments. She helped him with his homework. That was the woman he decided had to die. CJ would later claim that he had been mistreated for years and that the killings were his answer to it. His family disputed that completely, and the record of what Marianne actually did for him sits awkwardly beside the accusation. That is as far into that argument as this story needs to go. What is not in dispute is the arrangement he made. He went to another 17-year-old, a young man named Terry T. Brown Jr., and asked him to get rid of his family. That included his own father. And because CJ had no cash, the payment was the house itself. Whatever Brown could carry out of it was his. His girlfriend, a young woman from Torrington named Mackenzie Bezio, knew. She tried to talk them out of it. When they would not listen, she went along with it anyway. That detail matters more than it might seem. Somebody in this story understood exactly how wrong it was and said so out loud. And it changed nothing. The plan went ahead, with a witness who had already objected to it, which tells you how committed a 17-year-old can be to an idea once he has decided a woman is standing in his way. On the 11th of May 2020, police in Windsor were called to a report of a burglary and an attack inside the home. What they found there was the arrangement, carried out to the letter. Marianne Jurenka and her 78-year-old mother, Sandra Marzi, were attacked more than 20 times over. The whole thing went on for roughly 5.5 hours. Charles Jurenka Sr. was injured as well. He survived. His wife and his mother-in-law did not. The family's own statement to the court, delivered through their lawyer, is the part that people cannot shake. They said the two women were attacked, bleeding out, frightened, and begging for their lives. 5.5 hours is not a moment of violence. It is an afternoon. Prosecutors from the office of Hartford State's Attorney Sharmise L. Walcott brought the case, and it came before Judge Kevin C. Doyle. Terry Brown Jr., the young man who carried it out, was convicted of murder. On the 2nd of March 2022, he was sentenced to 58 years. On the 2nd of May 2023, Charles Jurenka Jr. pleaded guilty. The charges he admitted to were conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of accessory to murder, and accessory to assault. He was 20 years old by then, and he was sentenced to 48 years in prison. He apologized in court and said he deserved it. Mackenzie Bezio, who had tried to stop it and then helped anyway, pleaded to conspiracy to commit murder and received 20 years, suspended after 10 years served, followed by 5 years of probation. 3 young people, none of them older than 17 when the plan was made. 2 women dead. 1 man who survived being attacked in his own home and then had to absorb the fact that his son had ordered it. Spare a moment for Charles Jurenka Sr. He was on the list too. His own child had included him in the instruction to get rid of the family, and he lived through the attack that killed his wife and her elderly mother. Then he had to sit through the court process and hear the arrangement described out loud, including the part where his boy claimed the household had mistreated him, an account the rest of the family rejected outright. Whatever he thought he was going to feel in that courtroom, there is no preparation for it. Sandra Marzi should not have been in this story at all. She was 78 years old, and she was simply present, a grandmother visiting her daughter's house on an ordinary Monday in May. She had no part in whatever grievance CJ believed he was settling. She was in the wrong room when a 17-year-old decided that a house full of people was an acceptable price for getting his own way. And the price of all of it, the entire value placed on Marianne Jurenka's life and her mother's life, was not a sum of money at all. It was permission to loot the house afterward. Charles Jurenka Jr. sold his family for the contents of their home. The next case on this list did the same arithmetic with a car and a 2-day head start, and the girl who did it was 15 years old. Case 6. Jenna Oakley. A 13-year-old boy came home and found his stepmother lying in the basement. By the time anyone understood what had happened to her, his stepsister was already most of the way across the country in his mother's car. With a boyfriend, nobody in that house had wanted her anywhere near. She was 15 years old. Rhonda Oakley was 52. Before she married Philip Oakley, she had raised 4 children largely on her own, which tells you most of what you need to know about the sort of work she was used to. In April of 2016, the household grew. Philip's 2 children from a previous relationship, Jenna and her 13-year-old brother, moved down from Indiana to live with them in Danville, Kentucky. So Rhonda took in 2 more. She had not given birth to them, and she had no obligation to them beyond the one she chose, and she chose it anyway. The problem arrived in the form of a 20-year-old named Kenneth Nye. Jenna was 15. She had met him while she was still living with her mother in Indiana, and the relationship had carried on after the move south. Philip and Rhonda did not approve of it, and they tried to limit the contact between them, which is the least remarkable decision 2 parents have ever made about a 15-year-old and a grown man. Philip went further than disapproval. He called the police about Nye, and he spoke to him directly and told him to stay away from his daughter. Jenna did not see any of it the way her father did. On the 31st of August 2016, Kenneth Nye flew into Lexington. He landed in the afternoon and took a taxi straight to the Oakley home. Whatever was said in that house that night, it ended with a 15-year-old girl and a 20-year-old man deciding that Rhonda was the obstacle. Rhonda Oakley was stabbed to death. She was found in the basement of her own home on the 1st of September, and the person who found her was her 13-year-old stepson. That is the detail this case never gets away from. A boy came downstairs and found the woman who had taken him in, and the rest of his life divides at that moment. Jenna and Nye took Rhonda's Honda and ran. A nationwide search went out. Within days they were picked up in New Mexico, most of the way across the country, still in the dead woman's car. The investigation moved quickly because they left a trail a child could follow. Philip told police about Nye straight away. Detectives pulled airport surveillance showing Nye's arrival, taxi records tracking him to the door, and store surveillance capturing Jenna afterward. There was no mystery to solve. There was only a car to catch. Kenneth Nye never faced a jury. He took his own life in a New Mexico jail cell, and he left a note behind taking full responsibility for what had happened. That left Jenna. She was charged as an adult despite her age. In January of 2019, by then 17, she pleaded guilty. The murder charge was amended down to first-degree manslaughter, and she pleaded to that and to theft. On the 28th of March 2019, Boyle Circuit Court Judge Darren Peckler sentenced her. 10 years for the manslaughter, 5 years for the theft, and he ordered them served one after the other rather than together, which brought the total to 15 years. Her lawyers had argued for residential treatment instead of prison. Staff from the juvenile facility testified about how well behaved she had been while she waited. The judge was not moved. He said the killing had been particularly cruel. He called it senseless, and then he went further and called it callous. Philip Oakley stood up in that courtroom and spoke to his own daughter. He said he wanted to know why she did what she did. Then he added the sentence that cuts to the middle of this entire list. He told her that neither he nor Rhonda had ever abused her. That is the answer to the question people always ask about cases like this one. There was no torment. There was no cruelty in that house that anyone has ever been able to point to. There was a woman who took in 2 children who were not hers, and a set of rules about a boyfriend, and a 15-year-old who decided the rules were worth a life. Philip called the 15-year sentence too short. He is not alone in thinking so. 15 years for a life, with the manslaughter charge landing well below the murder count she was originally facing, struck a lot of people following the case as thin arithmetic. Jenna Oakley was sent to the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women at Pewee Valley, and by one account, she became eligible to be considered for release in 2025. Rhonda Oakley had 4 children of her own, and in the last months of her life, she was also raising 2 more. Jenna Oakley killed the woman who took her in over a boyfriend and a curfew. The woman in our next case had a colder reason and a slower method. She spent weeks trying to recruit her own neighbours to help her do it, and when they refused, she buried the answer in her garden. If cases like these keep you watching to the end, subscribing is how more of them find you. It costs nothing. Case 7. Lena Mzimeli. She told everyone her stepmother had gone travelling to buy stock for resale. First to Lupane, then on to Victoria Falls. It was a perfectly ordinary explanation for a woman being away from home, and it held for 4 months. Then, police, acting on a tip, walked into the family compound and started digging up the vegetable garden. This case comes from Chalocho in Matabeleland North in Zimbabwe, and it is the thinnest sourced case on this list. Most of what is known publicly comes from a single court report, so the specifics deserve to be handled carefully. What the High Court found is this. Jennifer Dube was 58 years old. She had married the father of a woman named Lena Ntombiyakwabo Mzimeli, and by the time of the killing, that father had died. Mzimeli was 33, and her own mother had died some years earlier, which meant Jennifer Dube was the woman occupying the space a mother would have occupied. She was also, as far as Mzimeli was concerned, standing on top of money. When Mzimeli's father died, he left an estate. Mzimeli believed she was entitled to a share of what came out of it, and she believed her stepmother was refusing to hand any of it over. That grievance is the whole engine of this case. What she did with it is the part that separates her from almost everyone else here. She went looking for help, and she was not remotely subtle about it. In the weeks before the killing, Mzimeli approached several of her neighbours and asked them to help her kill Jennifer Dube. She told them why. She told them her stepmother was withholding the benefits of her late father's estate. Every one of them said no. She was not whispering it to one trusted friend either. She went from homestead to homestead in a rural community where everybody knows everybody, and she made the same request more than once, and each time she explained her reasoning as though it were a business grievance rather than a plan to end a woman's life. Think about what that means. Multiple people in that community were told, in advance, in plain language, that a woman intended to murder her stepmother. They declined to take part. And then, apparently, life carried on. Having exhausted the neighbours, Mzimeli said she would get help from her boyfriend instead. His name was given in court as Nkosiyeza Mkandla. The killing happened around May of 2025. The court found that the pair strangled Jennifer Dube with an electric cable. Then they buried her in a shallow grave in the garden of the family homestead, wrapped in a blanket, with the cable still tied around her, and covered the spot with maize stalks and an old door frame. After that, Mzimeli produced the travel story and repeated it to anyone who asked. She added a detail to make it convincing. Her stepmother had gone to Lupane first, she said, to collect a passport, and only then on to Victoria Falls. For several days afterward, she went around to neighbouring homes, saying she was frightened of staying by herself while Dube was away, which had the effect of making her look like a woman missing her family, rather than a woman who had buried one of them in the garden. 4 months went by. On the 2nd of September 2025, police, acting on information they had received, came to the property and recovered Jennifer Dube's body from the garden. She had been in the ground long enough that the state of her remains told its own story about how long the lie had been running. At the High Court sitting on circuit in Hwangi, Mzimeli denied everything. She told the court she had regarded Jennifer Dube as a mother figure, that there had been no hostility between them, and that police had pressured her into a statement. The court did not accept it. Justice Nokutula Moyo convicted her of murder and sentenced her to 17 years in prison. Her boyfriend was never arrested. As far as the public record goes, Nkosiyeza Mkandla remains at large, which means one of the two people the court found responsible for killing Jennifer Dubé has never answered for it at all. The court also heard that Mzimeli had denied there was any bad blood between them at all, which sat awkwardly beside the evidence of what she had been asking her neighbours to do. There is very little available about who Jennifer Dubé was. No occupation, no children named, no photograph that made it into wide circulation. She married a man, she outlived him, and she was killed by his daughter over what he left behind. That is nearly the whole public record of a 58-year-old woman's existence, and there is something bleak in that on its own. The estate at the centre of it was never described in any detail either. Whatever Mzimeli believed she was owed, she was willing to canvass her neighbourhood for an accomplice to collect it. Lena Mzimeli asked half a village for help killing her stepmother, and got turned down by all of them. The man in our next case needed no accomplice, no plan, and no persuasion. He had a knife, a grudge about property, and roughly 3 minutes. Case 8. Atbeer. He came to the house to demand money. When he was inside, he bolted the doors from within so that nobody could get out and nobody could get in. And then he used a knife on 3 people. All 3 of them died, but one of them lived long enough to reach a hospital bed and name him. And that statement is the only reason anybody knows what happened in that room. What followed was one of the longest legal journeys on this entire list. The case comes from Mukherjee Nagar in northwest Delhi on the 22nd of January 1996. Atbeer's father was a man named Jaswant Singh who had 2 wives. Atbeer was the son of the first, a woman named Chandrawati. His father had gone on to live with his second wife, Sheila Devi, and their children in Delhi, while Atbeer was based out in Bulandshahr in Uttar Pradesh. Atbeer objected to that arrangement deeply, and running underneath the objection was a dispute over how the family's properties were to be divided. That is the ordinary shape of a great many Indian family disputes, and the overwhelming majority of them end in a civil court, in paperwork, in years of slow argument between relatives who stop speaking to each other. This one did not. According to the case against him, he had settled on an explanation for why things were not going his way. He decided his stepmother was the one turning his father against him. She was the reason he was being pushed out of what he believed was his. On the 22nd of January, he arrived at the house with a friend named Ashok. He demanded money from Sheila Devi. Then the doors were bolted from the inside, and he attacked the family with a knife. Sheila Devi died. So did her son, Manish. Her daughter, Savita, was gravely wounded and was taken to Hindu Rao Hospital. That daughter is the reason this case was ever solved. A doctor examined her and certified that she was fit to give a statement. An inspector named Virender Singh sat down and recorded what she said. And what she said was her stepbrother's name. 2 days later, on the 24th of January, Savita died of her injuries. So the account that convicted Atbeer was a dying declaration given by a young woman who already had hours to live, about the man who had just killed her mother and her brother. It became the spine of the prosecution and was corroborated by other witnesses who knew the family. Then the case entered the courts, and it stayed there for the better part of 30 years. On the 27th of September 2004, Additional Sessions Judge Amar Nath sentenced Atbeer to death, describing the case as falling into the rarest of rare category, which is the standard Indian courts apply before imposing capital punishment. His accomplice, Ashok, was sentenced to life imprisonment. Atbeer's mother, Chandrawati, was named as a co-accused, but she absconded. On the 13th of January 2006, the Delhi High Court confirmed the death sentence. On the 9th of August 2010, the Supreme Court of India confirmed it as well, upholding both the conviction and a finding that this was among the rarest of rare crimes. 3 courts, 3 confirmations. His review petition was dismissed in March of 2011, and his curative petition went the same way that May. by any reasonable expectation, that was the end. It was not. On the 15th of November 2012, the President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, commuted Atbeer's death sentence to life imprisonment. The commutation came with a condition attached. He was to remain in custody for the rest of his natural life, with no parole and no remission, which, in practice, means a life sentence that genuinely runs until death. Prison records date the formal order to January of the following year. The story then has one more chapter. In April of 2022, the Supreme Court considered his situation again, and held that even a prisoner in his position could not be subjected to a blanket refusal of furlough. By that point, Atbeer had served roughly 26 years inside Tihar jail. Prison records show he had been behind bars for roughly 26 years by the time that ruling came down, most of them under a sentence of death. It is worth stating plainly, because it is widely got wrong, Atbeer was sentenced to death, and that sentence was confirmed by the High Court and by the Supreme Court. But he was not executed. He is serving life without remission. Sheila Devi was killed because a grown man decided she was the reason his father would not give him what he wanted. Her son died beside her. Her daughter lasted 2 more days, and she spent part of that time telling a police inspector exactly who had done it. 3 people died in that house over the division of a family's property. No court ever heard from Chandrawati either. She absconded and was never tried alongside the others. Atbeer killed over a share of family property in 1996. The young man in our next case wanted the same thing 3 decades later and half a world away. And before he did anything about it, he went online and asked the internet whether it would work. If you are still here, this deep into the list, you are exactly who these are made for. Subscribe, and they will keep coming. Case 9. Abdul Sami. He rang for an ambulance just before midday and said he had found his stepmother in the bath with her head under the water. It sounded like a drowning, and for a while that is what it looked like. Then a paramedic noticed a red mark running across the front of her neck, and months later, when detectives went through his phone, they found the question he had typed into a search bar before any of it happened. Rizvana Kusa was 41 years old. She lived in Bradford in West Yorkshire in the north of England, in a house on Kensington Street she shared with her husband and his son. Her husband had separated from his first wife, and Rizvana had come into that household as his new wife. Her family described her afterward as someone whose heart was full of love and selflessness. A cherished daughter, a sister, an aunt, a friend. Ordinary words, and the fact that they are ordinary is rather the point. She was somebody's cherished relative, going about a normal life in a normal house. Her stepson was Abdul Sami. The reporting puts him at 22 or 23 at the time he was sentenced. He lived under the same roof. In the months before the 15th of August 2023, Sami was doing some reading. He visited a number of websites about inheritance, and then he typed a question into a search engine that removed any possibility of misunderstanding what he was thinking about. He asked whether a killer inherits from their victim's estate. He was not researching whether it was wrong. He was researching whether it would pay. That is a question with an answer, incidentally, and the answer is no. Most legal systems have a rule preventing a killer from profiting from the estate of the person they killed. Whatever he found when he typed it, it did not stop him. On the 15th of August, Sami strangled Rizvana Kusa with her own headscarf. Then he arranged the scene to look like an accident in the bathroom, and he made the call, and he told the operator he had found her, half in and half out of the bath with her head submerged. He was talked through starting resuscitation. Paramedics arrived and worked on her, and one of them saw the mark on her neck. She never regained consciousness. 2 days later, on the 17th of August, Rizvana Kuza died in hospital of a brain injury caused by a lack of oxygen. He stuck to that account for 2.5 years. His account was that any mark on her neck came from him pulling the headscarf away so that he could perform CPR. It was a reasonable enough story on its face, and it is the sort of explanation that would be very hard to disprove without doing exactly the kind of painstaking work that West Yorkshire Police then did. West Yorkshire Police did not let it go. The investigation ran for well over 2 years. The senior investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Matt Holdsworth, described it afterward as complex and technical, which is police language for a case built from forensic detail and digital records, rather than from witnesses. The post-mortem established that she had died from oxygen deprivation, not from drowning. The phone gave them the motive. Sammy's trial took place at Bradford Crown Court, prosecuted by Karma Melly KC. Sammy denied murder. On the 17th of March 2026, the jury took less than 3.5 hours to return a unanimous guilty verdict. 3 days later, on the 20th of March, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years and 91 days. He will not be considered for release until that minimum has been served, and being considered is not the same thing as being released. There was no plea and no admission at any stage. He made the jury sit through all of it. Rizvana's sister-in-law, Mariam Afzal, read a statement to the court. She asked him directly what he had taken her life for. She answered her own question with a single word: money. Then she said the thing that families in these cases so often end up saying, which is that he lied about it, over and over again. Her family said the void Rizvana left was immeasurable. They described a woman remembered for her warmth and her generosity, someone whose kindness had left a mark on everyone she met, and the local community in Bradford felt the loss of her keenly. There is a strange, very modern awfulness to that search history. Plenty of killers on this list wanted money. Christy Koslow wanted an inheritance. Tosha Daly wanted a life insurance payout. But Abdul Sami sat with a device in his hand and asked a question about the mechanics of profiting from a murder. And the machine answered him. And then he went and did it anyway. Abdul Sami looked up whether killing his stepmother would make him richer. The girl who closes this list did not need to look anything up. She was 17. She already knew exactly what she stood to inherit, and she had worked out that the fastest way to reach it was to hand 2 teenage boys a map of her own house. Case 10. Christy Koslow. She was 17 years old and she lived in one of the wealthiest neighbourhoods in Fort Worth. She had a stepmother from a petroleum family, a father who flew helicopters, and a future that most people would consider settled. She decided it was not arriving fast enough, so she drew 2 teenage boys a map of her own home, handed over the code that switched off the alarm, and told them what the job was worth. Karen Courtney Koslow was 40 years old. She came from money, and she had married into a comfortable life with Jack Koslow, a helicopter pilot, in the Rivercrest neighborhood of Fort Worth, Texas. Between them, they had built the sort of household that looks, from the outside, like the absence of problems. Christy Koslow was born in February of 1975, which made her 17 in the spring of 1992. She was living in that house, and she had done the arithmetic on what would happen to the family money if the 2 adults in it were gone. She believed she stood to come into as much as $12 million. There was one obstacle in the paperwork, and it may explain the shape of everything that followed. Karen's will excluded her. Christy recruited 2 19-year-olds. The first was her boyfriend, Brian Dennis Salter. The second was his friend, Jeffrey Dillingham, who worked in a video store. Neither of them was a criminal of any standing. They were teenagers, and she brought them in with a promise of money that would only exist if 2 people died. What she gave them was the kind of help only somebody inside the house could give. She drew them a layout of the property. She supplied the alarm code, She told them how to get in without a struggle and where to go once they were inside. On the 12th of March 1992, the two young men entered the Koslow home. Dillingham attacked the couple with a metal pry bar. Salter cut their throats. Karen Koslow died. Jack Koslow, 48 years old, was beaten unconscious and left for dead on that floor beside his wife. But he came round. He got himself out of the house, staggered to a neighbour's door, and called the police. On the way out, they took a wristwatch and about $200 in cash to make it look like a burglary. The watch was worth a little over $1,500, the staging for a plan built around $12 million. Suspicion landed first on Jack, the way it does when a husband survives an attack that kills his wife. It did not stay there. Police received a tip from a friend of Dillingham's, a man who had helped him get rid of the pry bar and the clothes he had been wearing. About 2 weeks after the murder, Dillingham was arrested, and when he confessed, the entire arrangement came apart. The map, the alarm code, the 17-year-old stepdaughter who had supplied both. The three of them were dealt with very differently. Brian Salter pleaded guilty and received a life sentence. Jeffrey Dillingham refused a plea, took his chances at trial, and was sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection on the 1st of November 2000 at 27 years old for a murder he committed at 19 in exchange for money he never received and never could have received. Christy Koslow was convicted of capital murder in the summer of 1994. The jury could not agree on sending her to death row. She was sentenced to life in prison. She becomes eligible to be considered for parole in 2027. Jack Koslow, the man who survived the pry bar and lost his wife, has largely declined to speak publicly about the case in the decades since. There is not much a person could say. She is still in a Texas prison. She is 51 years old now, and she has spent more of her life inside than out. Now step back from all 10 of them. It would be easy to look at this list and file it under Wicked Stepmothers Turned Upside Down, a set of stories about families that were broken before anything happened. That is not what the record shows. Rhonda Oakley took in 2 children who were not hers. Marianne Zarenka drove a boy to his appointments and sat with him over his homework. Jean Morlett gave a young man a bed when his own mother would not. Judy Slebzak took in a stepson who had nowhere else to go. In case after case, the woman who died was the one who had chosen to take somebody on. The thing I keep returning to is how small the sums were. 12 million in one case, yes, but also a repossessed car, a share of an estate nobody could describe, whatever could be carried out of a house in a single night. These were not people driven to the edge of anything. They were people who wanted something sooner than they were going to get it. What survived is thin. A father who lost his wife and gained the knowledge of who took her. A stepson who came home to a basement. A husband who lived through an attack in his own house and then sat through a hearing and heard the arrangement read aloud. A sister-in-law who stood in a courtroom in Bradford and asked what the price had been. What did not survive is easier to list, because it is 10 women who opened their homes to somebody else's child. Somewhere there is still a video on a phone, a young woman jumping up and down in front of the camera, laughing, telling whoever presses play that she did it herself. She was right about one thing. She did do it herself. She just seems to have believed it was worth doing. 10 households, 10 women who married into somebody else's family and took on somebody else's children. Every one of them was killed by one of those children over money or property or a bed they were being asked to give up. This is exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.